So now let's move on to the fun part, the different types of COVID-19 vaccines. So there are four types of COVID-19 vaccines that have been currently approved around the world. So there are mRNA vaccines, and some examples of mRNA vaccines are the Pfizer/BioNTech vaccine and the Moderna vaccine. Then you have protein subunit vaccines. There's only one protein subunit vaccine that has been approved thus far, and that is Epivac Corona. And then you have inactivated vaccines. There are a lot of inactivated COVID-19 vaccines that have been currently approved. These are CoronaVac, BBIP CoreV, Covaxin, WIBP CoreV, Covovac, and Casvac. Then, finally, viral vector vaccines. Similarly to inactivated vaccines, there are a lot of examples of viral vector vaccines that have been currently approved. So you have AstraZeneca, which is also called Vaxzevria or Covishield, Sputnik 5, Sputnik Light, Johnson & Johnson's, Convidicia, and ZF2001. So now I'll go in depth on the science behind each vaccine. Let's start off with mRNA vaccines. Well, mRNA vaccines are a relatively new way of developing vaccines, as prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, there hadn't been any mRNA vaccines that had been through the whole approvals process in humans. Well, that's changed now. So let's take a look at the science behind mRNA vaccines. So obviously, we start off with mRNA, which stands for messenger RNA. Well, mRNA's job is given in its name. It acts as a messenger between DNA, which stores the information required for the construction of proteins in our body, to ribosomes, which are the actual protein-making factories of our cells. So, based on the sequence of mRNA, ribosomes will construct a specific protein. So now let's look at SARS-CoV-2, which has a lot of proteins on its surface itself. These proteins are called spike proteins, and they are unique to SARS-CoV-2 and allow it to enter host cells and replicate. So when we're infected by SARS-CoV-2, our body's predicament is that we do not have the antibodies required to bind to these spike proteins and neutralize them. Therefore, we get so sick from COVID-19. Well, mRNA vaccines try to fight this problem. Well, the mRNA vaccine contains mRNA that has a specific sequence that tells the ribosomes in our cell to construct a spike protein that would normally only be found on the surface of SARS-CoV-2. So why would we want to put a part of SARS-CoV-2 in our own bodies? Well, it's to generate an immune response. So because the spike protein is not native to our own body and is thus a foreign particle, it is considered an antigen. And thus, our body treats it as it would to any other antigen. So now that this antigen, or spike protein, is inside our cell, it encounters an MHC molecule, which takes this antigen to the cell surface. From there, an immune cell called the T helper cell, through the help of its T cell receptor, will bind to the spike protein on the MHC and will release small signaling molecules called cytokines. These cytokines will then stimulate another type of immune cell called the B cell to divide. And these clones of the B cell can become either a B plasma cell or a B memory cell. So the B plasma cell actually generates the antibodies required to bind to these antigens, which is in this case the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein. Meanwhile, the B memory cell stores these antibodies for later use if we were to ever encounter this antigen again. So look what's happened. We have the antibodies required to neutralize a very important part of SARS-CoV-2. So therefore, if we were to ever be infected by SARS-CoV-2, we would already have the antibodies necessary to fight off the virus because we already have antibodies that can bind to the spike proteins on SARS-CoV-2. Therefore, the mRNA vaccine essentially creates a simulation for our adaptive immune system to figure out how to fight off SARS-CoV-2. So that's how the mRNA vaccine works. So what are some examples of mRNA vaccines? Well, the first one is the Pfizer/BioNTech vaccine, which was developed in the US and Germany. It has been approved in these countries. The second one is the Moderna vaccine, which was developed in the US. It has been approved in these countries. So that's the mRNA vaccine. Hopefully you learned a lot, and thank you for watching. Check out the next video in the series to learn more about protein subunit vaccines.